Very good. Okay, there are lots of other questions and challenges, but I think I should now bring in the audience and let me just go through the audience, and if you could introduce yourself and make a point or ask a question and just say who it's directed to. Shall I just take 2 or 3 points? Gentleman here and then Sheila.
Hello.
I think it is.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm Carlos Oya from SOAS, University of London. I just wanted to touch on your practical example of Ethiopia. I've also been in Hawass a few weeks ago, and I've been following what's going on there. And I think my issue is, on a macro level, your overall narrative is quite sound. We know some of these stylized facts from history. The question is the contemporary dynamics of global capitalism, and particularly how global production networks work today compared to 30, 40 years ago. And I think one of the big challenges that countries like Ethiopia have is precisely, I think you mentioned the word patience, is time. The examples you gave about successful economies were examples of dual track trajectories with plenty of time, and also foundations from the early and efficient periods which helped the development of export-oriented industries and so on. Now, some of this is missing in cases like Ethiopia, and it's true that creating an enclave like Hawass or Bolelemi can help. But a lot hinges on how governments can deal with the global production networks as a whole and the various governance structures that rule these global production networks. So, for example, in the case of Hawass, I wonder whether the issue, which is quite different from your Huajan example, I wonder how central was for the government to actually persuade those at the top of the network, PVH, or in another cluster, H&M, to bring factories from Asia. To what extent it is factories from Asia, where these production networks are concentrated, are the ones that are being addressed and targeted to move, to expand actually, because it's more expansion than relocation, or the right way forward is actually to go to the top, to Inditex, etc. And what are the challenges to go to that top? What is it that the governments can do to persuade those big players to move?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Sheila.
Thank you, Sheila Page, ODI. I wanted one general point and a slightly more specific one. There is a temptation for newly successful countries to believe that they have the recipe. And I couldn't help sort of hearing, as you were talking about the great advantages of South-South in China, hearing of Alliance for Progress in the 60s and how the US knew more than the ex-colonial powers and therefore could develop Latin America successfully. I think there's a real risk that we all think we know the recipe until we don't. And there's a real risk in assuming that any area's experience can be transferred to another. The ingredients approach, I must admit, appeals to me more. But my more specific question is on the stability and how, at what point you declare that a country is developed. I mean, structural development is structural transformation. I mean, that's just the definition. The question is, how long do we have to wait before we can be sure? I mean, going back 100 years, the most successful countries were the Latin American jaguars, I suppose. Argentina and Brazil were the notoriously richest countries in the world. They didn't last. Some of the successful countries at the time, the US, did. I don't think you really tackled how sustainable things like China, Ethiopia, Rwanda will be, all of which have not yet had a change in regime, have not yet really had a challenge to their model. And you seem to be taking a very short-term assessment of success. I think you need to look again at what makes a country repeatedly successful, repeatedly able to adjust, because there will be shocks to commodities, but also to industry, like the point about automation. So a slightly deeper approach would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Mr. Abdi Musa. I'm from Friends of the Home Foundation, a civil society organization working for Somalia. And And I would like to thank, first of all, to DFID and UK government, what they're doing for Somalia right now. They are very much engaged with Somalia right now. And I have got a question regarding development in Somalia. I know it's a different case because it has been a country, failed country for a long time. But instead of aid, I think the right approach for Somalia would be, even though there is security problems, and investment. And the investment, we are campaigning, we're the only organization campaigning for Somalia debt relief, 5.3 billion debt. I was outside Lancaster House when the Somali president and Somali conference was here, and asking for debt relief for Somalia, and I distributed documented to 100 top leading world media outlets asking for debt relief for Somalia. We have got very resourceful country. A whole Somalia can benefit only the coast of Somalia, 3,300 kilometers long of coast. The military, the infrastructure, every investment we need can be found on that sea, the resources in the sea. We want that right approach, saying that let's invest in Somalia and let us give Somalia a debt relief so that we can attract the investment we need, and we can invest our sea, and we can invest our natural resources we have. But before that, we want to have a genuine debt relief for Somalia. I know the Minister of Finance is working very hard to implement this staff management program, and it's going to finish next year. The question I have for DFID is, what can you do to help us get full debt relief for Somalia?
Okay.
This debt came from 1970s.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So these are three questions, and we come back to the audience. I think the last question is, maybe we can also generalize it a bit more in terms of, does this approach work in conflict-affected states, fragile conflict-affected states? Can you think about transformation in conflict-affected states? Do you need to think about other approaches, or is it tweaking? So that I think is a fundamental point. The second is one about sort of the resilience of the approach. How long term do we need to go? Automation, the window of opportunity. I know you've got a discussion on that in the book, so maybe you want to elaborate on that. But I think we're all concerned, of course, around it. At the same time, we can also be concerned about the lack of automation and the lack of technological change so far. So we can be concerned about the automation in the future. And I think there's an interesting question around how do you deal with lead firms, and how do you track them, and do you do that actual work? So with the Chinese firms, how do you do that in practice? Maybe go to you first, and maybe you want to and then answer one or two questions.
Thank you very much for the very good questions. The first one was the difference between Function and Hawass Ax. And the Hawass Ax, as you mentioned, it started with the collaboration between the Ethiopian government with PVH, which is one of the leading global buyers. And Function was an individual firms produced for the global markets. But here that, if you can have a PVH, which already have a global markets, and also the buyer who is willing to bring its manufacturer to come, that will be the best way, because you can immediately create thousands of jobs there. Like Function work very hard for 4 years, and now 5 years, create 6,500 jobs. And PVH, it came with 23 firms. And likely, they will be able to create 50,000 jobs within 3 years, and with a scope to create more than 100,000 jobs in a few years. But PVH would not come without the success of Function. Because for the global buyers, they have the markets. And they are pursuing something. First, they like to have a manufacturers which can produce good with consistent qualities and deliver goods timely. And if you go to a developing country, certainly, and they also, the cost should be low, right? If you go to a developing country today, their labor cost is low, so theoretically, the production cost should be low. But international buyer will not have the confidence because they don't know whether the manufacturer locally will be able to produce good with consistent quality and also deliver good timely. Because those kind of ability, on the one hand, depends on the manufacturer, but on the other hand, depends on whether the government are capable of providing those kind of supporting infrastructure and a business environment or not. So, and so by that, the international buyers, they are very risk averse. They will not put an order to a country without a track records. And so PUEVH will be willing, was willing to come to Hawass only because of the success of Function demonstrate. The Ethiopian governments, they are ready to support the firms and to make them exporting basis for the global markets. So my advice, certainly, now Ethiopia reached stage. They, on the one hand, certainly should continue to attract the individual firm to come, like in Hawass, in order to expand that. But they are also in a position to attract international buyers to bring their manufacturing to come. But if we go to other countries like Benin, like Nigeria, like Senegal, they don't have a track record yet. So under the kind of situation, if they talk to the international buyers will never listen to them. So at this stage, it might be important to create some kind of successful examples on an individual firm basis. And once they have that, the international buyer will be most likely to come. And once they come, the impact will be much larger. That's my response to the first question. Then I appreciate your warning about the recipe. To some extent, in the past, the Western country always think they have a recipe for success. And they teach the students, advise the government to follow the recipe they consider are right based on their experiences. But the experiences show they did not work. And certainly, a recipe from a developing country, we need to have a similar caution. But on the other hand, I think the reason why the recipe from the high-income country did not work, because the precondition in the high-income country are very different from the condition in the developing country. And in the developing country, the preconditions are more similar. So under this kind of situation, the recipe will have a more reference, values. But certainly, you cannot just exactly copy it, because even you have a similar precondition, but you still have a lot of specific conditions which are different. And if you want to make the program to work, not only you need to know the general principles, but you also need to pay attention to the specific condition. For example, the general principle I summarize in several different ways. One is to follow the comparative advantages. The other one is to look at what you have now. And based on what you have, what you can do well. Then create a condition to scale up what you can do well. I think it's a very general principle. Every country certainly has something they have. That's their endowments. And based on endowments, certainly they have some area which they can have competitive advantage. They can do well. But the trick is how to scale up what you can do well. And if you want to scale up what you can do well, you need to pay a lot of attention to the specific institutional arrangement and social, political situation in any country. For that, you cannot simply say, well, one approach in China work, one approach in Vietnam work, then Ethiopia will work. Not necessary. But I know if Ethiopia want to be competitive, they should produce something which are labor abundant, labor intensive. If they try to, like in the past, they also have investment promotion. But when they say investment promotion, they always say, we do not welcome sunset industry from our country. We only want to have sunrise industry. And the best we can compete with the US. If they adopt those kind of approach, they are not based on what they have, and they cannot do well on that. And no matter how much effort, they are not going to be successful. And so I know some kind of basic principle, but how to turn that basic principle into a strategy and can be implemented, that need to be country specific. So that's the response to your support. Yeah, your questions. Then coming to if you are in a country which do not have political stability and in a conflict, then certainly it will be hard because no one will want to risk their life to make investment in those areas. And I also hope is that certainly conflict is one stage, and once you have post-conflict, just like in Somalia today, you're not in the war every day. So you have some places, social political stability were already there. And under this kind of situation, how to make this kind of transitory stability into a permanent stability? I think to create job and hope for the people will be essential. But if you want to create job and hope for the people, then follow the recommendation from my new structural economics will be, might be the best way. Because for the new structural economics, you can have quick wins. Just like in Ethiopia, the success of Function was made within 1 year. Okay, and also in Rwanda, the success of CNH was made within 1 year. And within 1 year, you have a firm which can create 1,000 of jobs and export into the global market. You change the perception about the government, perception about your society, and a perception about the possibility to have a bright future for the young people. So that might be the best way. Achieve the political stability, and once you have stability, even if it's a short windows, then you need to run with the time to create the quick wins. Once you have the quick wins, the confidence on the incumbent government will be increased. And that will have some kind of virtuous, cycle effect. But if you lose that opportunity, then conflicts may come back again, and then you may have to suffer a lot before you have the window of opportunity to come again.
Okay, so being a pioneer is very important to help. That creates quick wins and have demonstration effects.
Thanks. I thought those were brilliant questions, and I agree with much of what has been said. I think just to underline the point about international buyers, so certainly when my teams talk to international buyers, it's very, very clear that the power of demonstration and knowledge and being in country and having done it and having established that relationship with government and having the evidence is very, very strong. It's very powerful. I would nuance it slightly that I think a lot of the companies that we talk to talk about Africa, sub-Saharan Africa also, as part of their 5, 6, 7 year business plan actually. So there is an caution what I say, there feels to be more of inevitability around companies' rising interest in really thinking about Ethiopia as the gateway, if you will, to East Africa in particular. And I think the question for us as the international community is, so what is it going to take to tip them? And how do you create, from a tipping point, a snowball effect? And how do you talk to government sensibly about that? And certainly PVH and Hawass do all the talking. We are following that particular lead. So, yeah, I think there's something that's potentially very important of getting this right over the next couple of years to create that tipping point and that snowball effect. Sheila, to your point, I also much prefer the ingredients rather than the recipe narrative. And certainly from DFID's point of view, what we say very strongly is we don't have the answers. We know what the ingredients are to an extent, but we don't know the recipe, and we wouldn't pretend to in many of the countries in which we work. There is something very powerful about speaking about other countries that have succeeded and using that as a point of departure for conversations with government, but I'm very empathetic to that view. On the question about stability and shocks and working in conflict-affected states and so forth, I should just say at the outset that I'm not qualified to give you an official view about what DFID can do to support debt relief for Somalia, so I won't do that, other than to say, obviously, debt relief, the HIPC initiative is something that the UK government and DFID has been deeply involved in the past. I very much agree that there is a sequence which starts with a political agreement. I would qualify, I think, a little bit what Professor Lin said, that I think that the economics is an essential part of that political agreement, but that very quickly those quick wins, the incentives, if you will, that growth, jobs, sensible economic policies can create between competing factions are critically important. And certainly in my experience of working in the Middle East, unlocking domestic investment first, before you start talking about international investment, has a very powerful effect on supporting a positively reinforcing political economy around stability. But as I say, I thought those were brilliant questions and exactly the sort of challenges that this narrative, which is still quite new, I think, need.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's important to have the ingredients, the recipe. There's a discussion on that. I think you also still need to cook as well to think about bringing it all together as well. Let's go to have a final round of comments. I think Stephen, you had your hand up first. Stephen is also leading work thinking about the relocation of economic activities in China to other countries, working together with Professor Lin and the CNSE in this context with others at ODI. So Stephen, you go first, and then we go to the left.
Thanks. Yeah, we're doing the work looking at what Chinese manufacturing firms might do in terms of moving to Africa, to Southeast Asia, or indeed to other parts of China, or automating. And we'll hopefully have some results towards the end of the year with the help of the team at CNSE. But the question that I wanted to raise, in a way, follows from some of the earlier questions that were raised by Carlos and Sheila. And that's about the role of the domestic business class. Because the questions here talked about the role of international buyers, which I absolutely agree is very important in the light manufacturing industries like shoes and garments and so on that we're all looking at. Without that foreign engagement, I won't call it investment, but engagement, the movement is not likely to happen. But what is also very important, I think, is whether that movement ultimately lead buying firms, encouraging Chinese firms mainly to move into Ethiopia to manufacture, if it doesn't enable or facilitate the emergence of a domestic business class, which might be, let's say, the Chinese entrepreneurs permanently basing themselves in their new country, but taking on the need to sustain development in that country, then I think you run into some of the concerns that Sheila expressed in terms of the long-term sustainability. I mean, this, of course, has happened in China, where you've got a domestic business class, but it's also, I think, true of many other countries where development has been successful or relatively successful. Where it's not true, or where there's I should say rather, a challenge in the work that we're doing here at ODI under the SET program, in Burma, Myanmar, one of the main issues that has to be addressed there is whether or not domestic entrepreneurs in the garment industry that we've looked at very closely can make themselves internationally competitive, or whether it's only the incoming foreign, mainly Chinese, Korean, Singaporean firms who can be competitive. So I think it would be interesting to hear your reflections, Justin, on that issue. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. We're going to run a little bit over time, with your permission, a few minutes. So Casper, you had? Or, yes.
Nikolai Schulz from the London School of Economics. I'm a PhD candidate in development studies. I've been looking at in recent months in Ghana and Tanzania at industries which confirm very much to what you are looking for. So agro-processing industries such as cashew processing, which are very labor intensive and which have a comparative advantage, if you want, because they have the cashews in these countries. But they're still struggling very much. They have low labor productivity. They lack the technicians. They have difficulties in accessing the machinery, the people to maintain it. Very high interest rates. Essentially, what's happening is in a country like Ghana, which has the capacity to process all the cashews they grow in the country, 95% of the cashews are going to India and Vietnam, of the raw cashew nuts. So in your model of new structural economics, what would be concrete industrial policies to actually help these industries to work on that comparative advantage?
Okay, I'm very quick. The gentleman behind you, yeah.
Hello, I'm George Kibala, a master's student in economics at Sciences Po Paris, in Paris. And my question, after reading your book, Beating the Odds, I really liked it. I have one question on regional integration and one on political economy. The one on regional integration, in chapter 6, you mentioned that countries with scarce resources shouldn't necessarily invest their scarce resources in regional infrastructure because they should rather invest it in infrastructures connecting them to the global market because world demand is much higher. I was just wondering to what extent you might be discounting the potential of regional integration to spur structural transformation, especially because a lot of intra-African trade is in manufactured goods and even in inputs and also in agricultural products. And then the second question on political economy is, it goes a bit back to what's been said before. The examples of Rwanda and Ethiopia are two strong ruling parties that have been in power. And when you talk about what are the necessary ingredients to get quick wins, you often mention vision and clarity. And when I hear that, I think about a developmental coalition or a political settlement that's in place beforehand. So I wonder to what extent you may be discounting that as a precondition to those quick wins you're referring to.
Okay, thank you, gentleman here.
My name is Emmanuel Ekembe. I'm from the Southern Cameroon's Development Front. My question is, don't you think that the over-reliance of Africa on natural resources rather than restructuring their institutions is a cause for the stagnant development? Because I tend to think that most sub-Saharan African's economy are still post-colonial economies relying on individuals rather than institutions, and this has caused many foreign direct investments not to succeed because they have only looked at the content and context and rather than looking also at the connection between contemporary development models and post-colonial models.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The last point, Alberto, and then we go back to the... Oh, okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Is it on? Oh, well, I'll shout anyway. Just one point to tie back into the regional integration argument, to the question actually, and going back in terms of stages of development. The kind of structural transformation argument posits that you're moving into higher value productive industries, and that usually means more capital intensive, less labor intensive, or higher value per worker. So that means that eventually a nation will go up to lower, essentially jobs are being displaced from one country to another. So the countries that can take advantage of this are the ones that are taking the lower, the light manufacturing industry's jobs. But what happens when you reach the last countries and there's no longer the capacity for that to be that kind of employment to be absorbed? And so in that sense, wouldn't a more regional integration approach, including free movement of labor, be a bit more conducive to that for these countries, in that sense that you can have free movement of jobs within an area which has larger demand, internal markets as well, creating greater demand for these jobs as well. And so is that perhaps something that we need to be thinking about in terms of this approach as well?
Could you pass the microphone? Sorry, I forgot.
Thank you. My name is Antoinette Salah. I'm an agricultural and food consultant. Thank you for your presentation, both Professor Lee and Melinda. My first question, I have two questions for Professor Ling. One is about the narrative beyond aid and the vision and the focus of political leaders or governments. You mentioned Senegal, Benin, Ghana. I've just been in Ghana last month, and I see the preparation of the new government about lifting up Ghanaians and the Ghanaian economy. Okay, so my question is, what do you think about African governments embarking on the partial processing of natural resources before export? Or should there be investment on the export of finished products? Will that lead to structural transformation? The second question is about what will attract foreign direct investment. Is it the cheap available labor in the African context, or is it already the agricultural processes that are already in place. My question is to Belinda. Sheila just referred to ingredients, and you answered saying that I prefer ingredients and do not know the recipe. Does that mean that the international development agencies have failed or failing the communities?
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. So we've run a little bit over already, so I'm going to give the speakers just maybe 1 or 2 minutes each. So that means that they can't address all the individual questions, but I think it's important to get all the questions out. Justin and Melinda may stay behind after the meeting, so I can talk to you individually as well. But maybe if you could just limit it to 2 minutes, Justin, and then you as well, Melinda. Then we
I'll
close.
start with Stefans' question. The goal certainly is to help domestic enterprises, entrepreneurs to grow up. But the way to do it might be to start with foreign direct investment. And at the beginning, allow them to import all the raw material, intermediate goods. Because if you want to reach international markets, then you need to be able to deliver good with good qualities. And good quality depends on several things. One certainly is management and technologies, and also good quality of intermediate products. And if you go to a low-income country, certainly they don't have high-quality intermediate inputs because, in general, that's a more capital-intensive. And certainly they don't have the management, they don't have the technologies. And that's the reason why, although we have programs to support small and medium-sized local firms, but they never grow up. But if you start with to attract foreign direct investment to come, at the beginning, although they import all the raw material, intermediate goods, and export all their products, but gradually they will, once they reach certain scale, they will localize the production. So they are going to have upstream investment. And once you have built up the supply chain domestically, then the local firm can enter easily. So that's the case in China. That's the case in Bangladesh. That's also the case in Mauritius. At the beginning, almost all the export-oriented light manufacturing were produced by foreign direct investment. But once they reach certain stages, the local firm can enter easily. And now most of them are local firms, both in certainly China, but also in Bangladesh and also in Mauritius. Then secondly, about the regional integration, it has been a goal for a long time, a pillar in almost the African unions and also in the global multilateral development institution. But it has been a pillar for several decades, but we did not see anything happen. The main reason is that the regional market is how large is that? Africa today, its GDP is around 2% of global GDP. That means what? The purchasing power in Africa is only 2% of global purchasing power. The market size in Africa is only 2%. But they divide that into 54 countries. And within each country, because the infrastructure is so poor, so the market is very fragmented. If you really want to make regional integration happen, how many roads, how many infrastructure you would need to build? And the market is so small, so you cannot justify that kind of infrastructure investment. So a better way is that regional integration certainly is desirable, but that should be a long-term goal. You started with trying to reach international markets. How large are international markets? US, 23% of global markets. European Union, 21% of global market. China now 17% of global market. Japan 7% of the global markets. You combine those 4 markets together, it's more than 2/3 of global markets. And how to reach those kind of 2/3 global markets? Certainly, you start with some kind of special economic zone with good infrastructure within that special economic zone. You build a road to link your special economic zone to the port. And once your goods shipped out of your port and reach one port in any of those 4 markets, already can reach those kind of market because they have good infrastructure. And by this way, it will be much easier to jumpstart the process. And once you have this kind of export-oriented business started with because the global market is so huge, so it can create thousands and thousands of jobs. For example, in the past, when you focus on the regional integrations and a domestic firm, if you have a firm create 200 jobs, you think that is a big firm. But if you target global market, 2,000 jobs just a beginning. And now it can easily create 100,000 jobs. And so I think that in terms of job creation, poverty reduction, and sustainable development, it should start with targeting global market instead of regional markets. And once you are successful in reaching global markets, you create more resources, and you can gradually improve domestic markets.
Final minute.
Yeah. So I answer separate question. Okay. The last one is that, and the last one is, the processing of resources. I think that you want to add value to the domestic production that is desirable. But you also need to look at whether you have the competitive advantage in those kind of activity or not. For example, in mineral, the processing of mineral, first, is very capital intensive, but actually it won't create much job. But the processing of agricultural product, it makes sense because it's more labor intensive, and also it can create, the investment will be not that large, and it create more job. So fundamentally, you need to follow the comparative advantages. Otherwise, the intention could be good, but the result can be very costly.
Thank you. That's really good. Linda.
So 2 points then. I mean, firstly, look, I think it's a very interesting question. My response would be, I don't think it would be the right approach for us to say we know exactly, for all the reasons we've talked about in this room today, what the recipe is in each and every country on structural transformation. It would be wrong politically. It would certainly not be accurate, given what we know about the evidence. And I don't think it would be the most humble approach either in our relationships with a lot of the partner governments in which we work in. I think better, more nuanced is to say we have experience, we have research, we have evidence, and we have willingness and ambition, but we're willing to work with you to find what the right path is for the country, would be my response. And secondly, quickly on regional integration, I actually don't see them necessarily quite so mutually exclusive. So I, in my mind, I think about the Trademark East Africa programme, which is about integrating across borders in order to help create a corridor for exports, which in turn helps deeper regional integration because you're tackling some of those barriers and obstacles to working across borders by definition. So I think, certainly on a recent visit to Uganda, we heard very strongly about the importance of better connections to the Mombasa port and how that could catalyse greater regional integration. But I agree that it's that international market lens that will be the stimulating factor rather than the size of domestic markets.
And maybe I'll come back to the political economy issue again. And I talk about, now I mentioned the successful example in Ethiopia and Rwanda, and both have more authoritarian government, and whether that is a precondition for that. I think it may not, because the most successful country in Africa, to me, is Mauritius. In the 1970s, they started with exactly the same project as I described in Ethiopia and Rwanda. They started with setting up an export processing zone and to attract foreign direct investment from Hong Kong, from Taiwan to relocate their textile and garment to Mauritius. And they were so successful. Currently, their per capita GDP is more than 10,000 US dollars. And by this kind of industrialization, starting with their comparative advantages. And they have a democratic society, a government, right? And from what I see is that every government, no matter what kind of regime, they have sufficient discretionary power. If they use those kind of discretionary power to support project which works, can really bring dynamic change in a country, then even they have a democratic government, the government will become stronger and stronger. Because if their policy works, they will be supported. And then they will pursue this kind of direction further, right? And even they have a change of government, as long as this kind of project can create job, export, revenue, growth, even if you have a change of government, the new government will continue to support this kind of project. So more important is right ideas and use the discretionary resources and power of the leaders to implement project which can bring quick wins. And that is more important than to be an authoritarian government or not.
Yeah, I mean the SET program looked at some of these issues around forms versus functions of institutions, and thinking around the importance of forging a consensus around transformation in the longer term. And Mauritius has been really good at doing that, and some of the Asian countries have done that. Ethiopia and Rwanda may have done that, and there's a question and challenge about other countries. And I would also strongly sort of emphasize the issues that Melinda was talking about with the Trademark East Africa program. So I was with them last week and the week before, and also I think Rory Stewart was at the port of Dar es Salaam, sort of unveiling a new package of support. And I think that is also regional infrastructure, as we say. It is basically unlocking the potential of firms, make it much more competitive for them to export as well. And I think, I mean, Mombasa is still an import port, so 85% I think of the total trade is import rather than export. But I think the plans to think around special economic zones around the port, now that you've reduced the trading cost, I think that's a very sound policy, and that you can also raise the productive capabilities. And at the moment there's some infrastructure projects going on. Now is the right time to be doing that. And I know that the Chinese had plans for a 1.5 billion special economic zone. I think Trademark East Africa have ideas around this, and I think that is how you can actually really transform economies and productive capacities. So on that positive note, and also thanks for the pioneering approach from Justin in Ethiopia and in other countries, but also thank you for DFID for the pioneering approach on supporting economic transformation. I think it's been really helpful, and I would finally sort of recommend that you get a copy of these books, and I think they're available for purchase, I think, and that you can all enjoy reading what you've heard as well. So thank you very much indeed, and a big applause for the two of you.